wouldn't know by the jacket I'm wearing, but if we consider the blooms on my wife's cancer tree, you'd be confused if I told you that it's spring here in Vermont. It's quite chilly today. In the same way, my friend Phil just recently suffered a blistering critique on Facebook. Apparently, his accuser felt that it was undeniably hypocritical of him to hold himself as a Christian and yet fail to publicly condemn this recent armed conflict. His accuser may be confused by what she sees in my friend and what she thinks is true Christianity. Being a modest man, he chose not to respond. However, as his friend and a proponent of rationality, I feel compelled to speak up for him, especially since it has great relevance to the larger issue at hand. Since this accusation comes immediately on the heels of Pope Leo's claim that God does not hear the prayers of those who start wars, I cannot but wonder if his accuser was piggybacking off of the Pope. Does the Pope have the liberty as a person living in a land of freedom to make such a claim? Sure. But the question is whether he has, as someone in a highly prominent position for Christianity, the justification to make that particular claim. It goes without saying that the Pope has influence over many Catholics and even non-religious people. In other words, was the Pope correct in what he claimed? And to a greater circumference, is someone warranted in using his claim to condemning others? Can I find common ground with him in Catholicism? You bet! I admire Catholicism's promotion of the majesty of worship, the reverence for the person of Jesus Christ, and their position against abortion of convenience. However, since the Pope holds himself out as not just a Christian, but also as one in a position of authority in Christianity, I have to ask what he is appealing to when he makes that claim. I wonder if he is referencing the Holy Scriptures in making his claim. Wouldn't that seem appropriate? I'd expect a Muslim imam to quote from the Quran and Hadith. Wouldn't the Pope be equally constrained by the very revelation of God? When we look into Scripture, what do we find regarding God and war? Does God condemn war outright regardless? In Exodus chapter 17, we have God commanding Moses to defeat the Amalekites with swords. Does God listen to Moses after this moment? I encourage you to look for yourself, but I think that even a non-church person is aware of Moses' continued standing in not just Christianity and Judaism, but Islam as well. Then, in numerous other passages, we have God involved with numerous figures acting as his representatives concerning warfare. Does God stop listening to them? Again, check it out for yourself in the book of Joshua. Possibly some might cite Jesus' love your enemies in Matthew 5:44. Does that serve to condemn all and every armed conflict? Catholicism would apparently say no, since it dispatched armies to counter the Islamic Crusades back in the 12th century. Am I saying that the basis of the Crusades was defensive and not, as it is popularized today, Christians cruelly forcing their religion on innocent people? Again, check it out for yourself. Possibly the Pope believes that he can speak what is called ex cathedra. That is, when he is speaking from his chair, he has the authority to change church doctrine. But think about it. The Holy Scriptures record that it was God Himself who commanded these specific military actions. So God got it wrong, and it took thousands of years, and this particular person to correct God? As to my friend's accuser, it's been my experience that the general public often has incorrect or non-scriptural ideas about, well, Scripture. For example, we often hear people reject someone else's pointing out of sin as going against Matthew 7:1's "do not judge." Thus, no one has the right to tell me I'm doing wrong. But if one looks at the context of that passage, they will find that it's about how you judge, not whether you judge. After all, if it was an outright prohibition against judging, then how can the person judge those who are judging them? In logic, we call this self-refuting. So maybe those like my friend's accuser has heard incorrect religious teaching that we cannot defend ourselves either as individuals or as nations. Being loving demands that no one take any military or individual self-defense action to right a wrong. Besides, anyone with theological training would remember that the very last book of the Bible informs us that Jesus Christ will return one day in the final judgment on all people. And when He does, there will be vast people groups who rise up against Him in battle. Sounds to me like there are times when armed conflict by nations, not vigilantes, is justified by God. Whether this present situation of this president is being conducted morally will be left up to history once it is all over. But to blast him outright is not just what Jesus would do in this situation. What the Pope's motivations are here, then I personally do not know. But what we can know is that his statement does not fit the Holy Scripture. This in no way makes war easy or grand. I've heard the sound of fear in a person's voice as danger approached. War cost. President Lincoln knew this when he spoke of hallowed ground by the brutal death of soldiers. By the way, if we incorrectly assume that loving someone automatically means that we may not act against them in a matter of justice, then we need to get rid of all the justice in all the courts everywhere, because they regularly administer moral justice against those who stand before them. Are they being unloving?